The room seemed to lean toward him when he said it, every fork slowing mid-air, every candle thawing into a wavering gold. We were at a rooftop restaurant with a view of the bay, and the kind of string lights that make ordinary people look like softened memories. The waiter had just refilled my water when my husband pushed back his chair, stood, straightened the seam of his jacket like a politician, and delivered the speech he must have practiced in the mirror. That he was leaving, that he was moving to Miami, that she was 22 and understood him, that we should be adults about transitions. He expected tears. He expected a collapse he could catch and then, benevolently, set down on the floor beside his chair like a purse he no longer wished to carry. He expected to be the man who taught me how to survive being abandoned. I folded my napkin. I made sure it was even. My hands did not shake. I had expected the performance. I just didn't know what kind of stage he'd rent for it. The thing about my husband is that he loves applause and he loves himself in equal measure. Perhaps he thought the city would clap for him. This courageous prince of reinvention, making an announcement over creme brulee. I looked at his face and felt nothing but a quiet that came from months of becoming a woman I hadn't met yet. You should know that I had loved him. I had loved him like you love a house that you have painted and lived in and memorized in the dark. I had loved him until I started bumping into furniture I hadn't put there. Lies like end tables, excuses like lamps with bulbs that never turned on. 2 months before that dinner, I noticed he started setting his phone face down and smiling at empty corners. He came home from late meetings with a gym bag that smelled like expensive cologne and someone else's citrus shampoo. He bought linen shirts he had never liked before. He began saying Miami like other people say paradise. I am not proud of the way I learned the rest, but I am not ashamed either. I hired a locksmith to replace the deadbolt the afternoon he lost his keys. That night, while he slept, I moved through our house with the caution of a surgeon and the steadiness of a witness. I took inventory of what I already knew. Birthdays, passwords, the particular crinkle by his right eye when he lies. I learned what I didn't. The Airbnb reservation in South Beach made on a Tuesday afternoon. The cash transfers labeled consulting. The unremarkable little text thread where she wrote about an exam grade and he wrote that she was brilliant. He had sent her a photo from our living room. Our wedding portrait leaned like a ghost in the background. I saved what needed saving. Screenshots are not romance, but they are evidence. I emailed what needed emailing. When I sat with a lawyer named Caroline 2 days later, I learned a language no one dreams of learning. Limited orders, equitable distribution, automatic restraints that activate the moment you file. She was calm. She had the kind of kindness that isn't a sweater. It's armor. She read our prenup like a detective listens to a clock. The small clause we had laughed about when we signed it, the fidelity clause he insisted meant nothing, meant everything. The law doesn't care about the rituals we invent to feel important. It cares about signatures and dates. Caroline told me what to gather. I gathered it. She told me how to move my direct deposit into an account he couldn't see. I did it. She told me not to confront him, not yet, to let the filing speak for me in a language judges respect. So I smiled when he came home late, and I said I was tired, and in the bathroom I pressed a towel to my mouth and let the scream travel into the cotton. I learned how to function like two people. The one who says good morning, and the one who prints bank statements at midnight. I told no one except my sister and one friend who would have taken a bullet for me, and later told me she would have preferred to take him by the ear and throw him out. Silence was not dignity, it was strategy. You cannot ask a storm to arrive on schedule, but you can close the windows before it does. The day of our anniversary, I wore a navy dress with a square neck, because it made me feel like a clean page. I put on our wedding ring. I needed it to be a witness to. On the drive to the restaurant, he hummed to a playlist he said a coworker had made. I stared at the little rectangles of evening light on the dashboard. I could already feel the envelope in my purse, the one that would change the shape of his mouth. Not yet, I told myself. Wait for the mirror he brought here. You know what happened next. He stood. He made his speech. He called it growth. He said he'd pay the bill because he was not a monster. People at nearby tables lowered their phones, seduced by the brief movie of someone else's life. I nodded like a teacher who has listened to a foolish explanation and refuses to make a child feel small. I picked up my water. I watched him search my face for the ruin he had rehearsed rescuing. When he didn't find it, he stumbled on his next line. That's when the man in a black blazer approached the table with the discretion of a shadow. "Are you Daniel Hart?" he asked my husband, in the same soft tone that waiters use when they say, "Sir, your dessert." He handed him the envelope. Daniel, my husband back then, laughed. He thought it was some club promotion, some rooftop giveaway. He slid out the papers, scanned a headline, and stopped laughing. "So you're serving me," he said to the man, but he was looking at me. The man nodded and left. He was gone in the way professionalism erases footprints. The room became silence with spoons in it. Daniel's knuckles showed through his skin. He turned a page and another until he found the paragraph that explained what this meant. I could see the moment he found the sentence about automatic restraints on marital assets. I could see the moment the math he had sketched in his head went up in smoke. The Miami condo deposit? Frozen. The consulting cash in the joint account? Frozen. The credit card in his wallet? Removed as an authorized user at noon. He looked at me then, not as a prop, not as a woman he had outgrown, but as a person he had miscalculated. I did not gloat. I did not cry. I told him in a voice only he could hear, that the divorce had been filed that morning, that I had followed every law, that he should read the instructions carefully, that this was the last dinner we would ever share. I said I wished him good health. I meant it. His health was now none of my business. He tried to pay the bill with a card that beeped red. He tried another. The waiter, to his mercy, walked to the bar and returned with a manager who offered to run it again. It beeped red again. I placed my card on the tray. The manager looked at me and then looked away in the tranquil way of people who have seen many endings, some loud, most quiet. When the receipt arrived, I wrote my name with a hand that felt newly my own. He followed me out into the elevator lobby with the rage of a man who realizes he is not the director anymore. He asked if I was trying to ruin him, and I said I was trying to rescue myself. He asked how I dared to ambush him on our night, and I said he had picked the stage. I had simply turned on the lights. When the elevator doors closed, I watched his reflection become smaller and smaller, until it was just a dark coin in a bright room. Do you want to know what I felt? Not triumph. Not victory. I felt the room in my chest fill with air after months of a ceiling pressing down. I felt like the version of me who had been waiting at the end of this hallway finally stepped forward and shook my hand. What he didn't see were all the doors I had already closed behind me. 2 days later, the locks on the house changed. I left his suits in garment bags on the porch with a note from my lawyer about a time-boxed pickup window. I stood at the living room window and watched the afternoon pour itself slowly across the floorboards. The house felt sad in the way an empty church feels sad, but it also felt honest. I hired a company to come and steam clean the sofa, and among the things they removed was a stain I didn't remember us making together. I moved money the way you move fragile things from one shelf to another. Carefully, slowly, with 2 hands and a body ready to catch. The first night I slept in the house alone. I put on a playlist I made for myself called Reentry. It had songs from before him, songs from us, songs from a future I had not auditioned for yet. I slept 9 hours and woke to a quiet that didn't feel like punishment. In the weeks that followed, everything that had once arrived prepackaged in marriage, plans, groceries, holidays, had to be built from parts. I learned the shape of Saturday mornings without a second coffee cup. I learned how to carry an entire ladder by myself, how to back a car into a narrow driveway without taking a breath, how to look at a calendar and not panic about who would be sitting across from me at Thanksgiving. My sister came over with lilies, and the cat slept in the doorway like a little sentry. I started going to a pottery class on Wednesdays because my therapist said my hands needed to know they were still good at making things. On my third bowl, the clay centered itself like a heart that had finally found its rhythm. As for him, he did what men like him do. He fled to sunshine. He sent me messages with subject lines like "we need to talk" and scolded me for being dramatic and for going nuclear. As if the quiet legal way I had acted was a missile. He said Miami was healing him. He sent a photo of a view from a high-rise I knew he had not paid for yet. The girl, her name was Tessa, I learned, posted videos of their dinners and their beach runs. She edited out his face often enough that I wondered if she was protecting him or embarrassed. I learned to let the updates arrive like weather. I could not stop the rain and I did not need to plant in it. He tried to move money, and the bank reminded him of the order. He tried to make me feel guilty, and guilt for once didn't fit. He tried to call my mother. My mother hung up. He tried to come by the house once without the scheduled pickup, and the new neighbor with forearms like statues of guard dogs, a kind and practical woman named Ruth, reminded him from her lawn that calling the police would not be hard work. When it was time for the first court date, I wore the navy dress again. Caroline sat beside me, all calm blades and soft edges. He arrived with a new lawyer and an aftershave that hadn't learned its place yet. He looked thinner. The girl didn't come. The judge was a woman who had the sort of patience that could hold a bridge in place. She reviewed the evidence and the timeline, the line items and the consulting cash. The young woman's face half reflected in the black of our television screen from that text thread. I didn't look at him much. Every marriage is a language, and ours had become a dialect only the two of us understood. Apologies that meant nothing, promises that meant maybe, and silences that meant please don't ask questions now. In the courtroom, the language changed to dates and exhibits and finally to rulings. By the time the judge was done, the house was mine. His retirement accounts were split with a wisdom that felt both fair and miraculous. He was assigned a portion of my legal fees, and a timeline was established. There was no yelling. There was no scene. There was, instead, a system designed to take the heat out of a fire and leave behind a shape the two of us could recognize as the end. Afterwards, outside the courthouse, he approached me with an expression I couldn't remember ever seeing on him. It was something like apology, but stripped of its usual decorations. He said he had made a mistake and he said he had been confused, and I said gently, because I remembered the boy he had been, that what he called confusion was a series of choices. He asked if we could talk and I said we had. The judge had made the conversation official. There is a mythology about revenge that makes it seem like a feast. People imagine you eat until you're full, and then push away from the table sated and forever clean. What I felt wasn't hunger and then fullness. It was distance. The further I walked from him, the more I could see the shape of what I had believed was love and what had become something else. A way of shrinking so he could grow. A practice of forgiving without requesting repair. A devotion to the idea of us at the expense of me. So I learned how to be a person in the middle of the day again. I learned that you can buy yourself flowers and it is not a bandage, sometimes it is just color. I learned that laughter finds you even when you aren't ready. It happened first at the grocery store, where a little boy held a pineapple like a trophy and declared, to no one in particular, that he had conquered something. I laughed in the aisle so long the woman beside me reached over and put the pineapple in my cart and said, "I think it's yours now." Months passed. Legal documents turned into agreements and those into new routines. The first night the house felt like mine, fully mine. I made a bowl of pasta at 10 p.m. and ate it on the floor by the window, the breeze moving the curtain like a slow hand. I thought of the woman I had been at that rooftop restaurant and the envelope in the waiter's hand, and I thanked that earlier version of me for her steadiness. She had not raised her voice. She had raised a boundary. Do you want the part you were promised in the title, the part where he saw what I had done? He saw it that night, of course, when the envelope arrived. But the real sight came later, when the consequences acclimated to his life like a season that refuses to leave. He messaged me a month in to say the deposit for the condo in Miami had fallen through because the funds hadn't reached in time, and the seller had moved on. 2 months in, he told me, without telling me by posting a photo of a sunset with a caption about rebuilding, that the girl wasn't around anymore. 3 months in, he tried to use a story about our dog to start a conversation, forgetting perhaps that he had never loved our dog as much as I did, and thus misjudging the bait. 4 months in, I saw him at a coffee shop back in our city, gray at the edges, and he looked like someone who had tried to outrun his own shadow, and then learned you cannot be faster than a thing attached to your feet. He had thought he would deliver a speech and be applauded for his courage to pursue happiness. He had not considered that happiness is more like a garden than a trophy. It needs tending. It needs the kind of care that isn't thrilling and often isn't seen. He had also not considered that a woman like me could be both gentle and prepared. People asked me later how I had remained so composed at the dinner. The truth is I had already cried all the tears I owned, on a tiled bathroom floor at 2 in the morning, into shirts inside a dryer so my neighbors would not hear, into the lap of my sister who kept saying I know as if that could build a bridge across a lake. I had already practiced my rage at a wall that did not mind. The dinner was not an earthquake. It was the ceremony after the tremors. It was the last scene in a play where the actors bow and we leave, and if we're lucky we step out into air that smells like rain and not smoke. On the anniversary of the dinner, 1 year later to the day, I went to the same restaurant alone. It was a different season. The breeze had a crisp patience. I asked for a table by the railing. The string lights glowed. I ordered the dish I hadn't tasted the year before. I brought a pen and a small notebook and wrote. This is where the choreography broke. This is where I learned to dance alone without apologizing for the space I take up. I do not want to paint him as a villain you can boo at and then forget. He was a man who made decisions that hurt people, including himself. He had a hunger that looked like youth but was actually fear. He thought chasing a girl half his age would erase the man in the mirror, who couldn't forgive himself for being ordinary. That's not a crime, it's a sadness. But sadness is not an excuse for harm. That distinction became the hinge my new life turned on. If you are listening to my voice and wondering what to do with your own envelope, literal or otherwise, here is what I learned from the slow, clean burn that followed that dinner. You are allowed to prepare in silence. It is not petty to protect yourself. It is wise. It is not cruel to end what has ended. It is truthful. There is a version of you on the other side of the hard thing you are certain will destroy you. She already knows how to hold a ladder and a pen. She is not waiting to be rescued. She is waiting to meet you. A few months after the divorce was finalized, work asked if I could travel to Miami for a conference. I almost said no. Then I booked the ticket. When I landed, the heat wrapped me like a damp blanket, and for a strange second, I saw the ghost of my old life at baggage claim, looking for me frantically so it could drag me back. I walked past it. On the last morning before my flight, I stood by the water while the sky unzipped itself from black to blue. I thought about 22-year-old me, about 32-year-old me, about the me who will be 52 and laughing in a kitchen I have not cooked in yet. I thought about the word leave, which we use like a villain in children's stories, and I thought about the ways it can also be a lantern. He had left. I had left. And in the leaving I had found. When I returned home, I hung a new mirror in the hallway. It was simple, oval wood frame, the kind that doesn't insist it's the point. Sometimes in the morning when the sun comes in at just the right angle, the mirror catches it and throws a thin, bright stripe on the floor. The cat chases it. I watch them both. I drink my coffee. The day begins. My husband stood up at our anniversary dinner and said he was leaving. He thought the stage was his and the audience would cheer. He thought the story was about him. He thought he had one. But the stage lights are impartial, and the audience is wiser than we imagine, and the story, like all honest stories, was about consequence and choice, boundary and relief. By the time he finished his speech, The ending had already been written, sealed, and served. By the time he realized the law was a net and not a suggestion, there was nothing to catch but himself. By the time he looked at me and searched for the ruin he had rehearsed, I had already gathered the pieces he meant to shatter and built a small sturdy house inside my chest. When he saw what I had done, it was already too late. Not for justice, not for peace, only for the idea that he could decide who I was. That part belonged to me now.